Ukrainian forces forging a fight like never before as Russian troops attack from land, sea, and air now. As all those Ukrainians who decide to stay and defend their capital, there are hundreds of thousands of people still fleeing the violence into neighboring countries, while Putin amps up his rhetoric, placing nuclear-capable units on high alert and threatening nuclear war, even as talks between Russia and Ukrainian delegations take place in Belarus. We've got team coverage with ABC News senior investigative reporter Aaron Katursky live from the besieged Ukrainian city of Lviv. Also, ABC News' Phil Lipoff from Poland, where many of those refugees have been escaping the violence. And ABC News' Elizabeth Schulze following all the economic fallout for us. Elizabeth, you also monitored the Pentagon for us. John Kirby speaking there, addressing just how the latest Russian attacks in Ukraine are impacting the Russian army movements there, saying they're still outside the city center. But there is an intention to enter the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv still.
That's right, Kira. The Pentagon press secretary made very clear that the Russian forces are still planning to advance on the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, and that perhaps their progress, he said, has been slowed by the mounting effort from the Ukrainian forces, but that this is still the plan here. You know, the U.S. officials, both Pentagon press secretary and the press secretary for the State Department, Ned Price, have been downplaying this warning from President Putin a little bit about the nuclear deterrence on high alert. Essentially, they are saying that this is rhetoric, that they don't want to continue to provoke. He says that Putin is going too far with this rhetoric, and that they need to dial it back down, that the U.S. is not going to ramp up its own heightened alert at this time. You know, they are trying to say that there is still this diplomatic path here as we see these talks going on. Obviously not a lot of progress on that front, and that's something that's made very clear. So at the same time, emphasizing the risk that this could still continue to escalate, Kira.
All right, and Aaron, take us now to Russian-Ukrainian talks, this delegation, and what came of that, if anything?
Well, nothing except a pledge, at least, to talk again, and that may be a positive sign. The delegations from Moscow and Kyiv met on the border with Belarus, and they sat around a very long table for these talks. The Ukrainians said they asked for an immediate ceasefire. Apparently none is forthcoming. And as these talks were unfolding, there was more attacking from Russia. Second largest city here in Ukraine, Kharkiv, came under heavy fire from Russian rockets. There were some additional casualties. Already more than 350 civilians have been killed here, according to Ukrainian figures, and many more wounded. So this has taken quite a human toll already in these early days of the fighting. The talks ended after a number of hours, and through it all, the Ukrainians gave a rather conciliatory statement saying that there might be ground in the future for some kind of an agreement, but it hasn't happened yet. And as word came that the talks were ending, Kira, there was a large explosion heard just outside of Kyiv.
And as we continue to listen to those explosions, civilians still fleeing, in addition, Phil, to losing their lives. 352 civilians now have been killed, hundreds more wounded. What more can you tell us about the refugee situation, especially from where you are?
Kira, I can tell you that number of civilians killed, people are watching all across the world, especially here in Poland, where so many refugees have come because, as I've said before, and we've been reporting, it's women and children who are crossing the border. The men, 18 to 60, have to stay there and fight. So one woman I spoke to today has 2 kids under the age of 7. Her husband told her to get into the car and drive to Poland the minute the fighting started. She did. She's here in Lublin now, and she was on the steps of City Hall today holding a Ukrainian flag and her 2 children. She was in tears, and she was telling us that her husband is fighting with a machine gun. She says machine gun because her son is saying machine gun. Her son continues to say to her, "Why does Daddy have a machine gun? Why is he fighting? Is he going to die? When can we go home?" And so while the talks are going on and while the world is trying to figure out sanctions and what to do for the Ukrainian people, the refugees here in Poland, they're monitoring that, but really what they're looking at is this narrow road in front of them. this narrow road to taking care of and feeding their children and getting a roof over their head somewhere here in Poland, whether it's with family or friends or it's with perfect strangers. As we saw yesterday, we followed one family to a shelter. 4 generations, great-grandmother, grandmother, mother, and children had nowhere to go. They wound up in a shelter. So whether you have some money to rent an Airbnb or get a hotel room across the border, it doesn't matter. The narrow road in front of you is, am I ever going to be able to get back to my country? And Kira, if I do, is it going to look the same?
And meanwhile, Elizabeth, I'll tell you what's not looking the same is just the economic situation and the ruble there in Russia crashing under the weight of the toughest sanctions in modern history. Russians lining up at the ATMs, the banks, they're fearful for their economic future, short and long term. What do you think the impact will be on the Russian people?
Kira, we are seeing the consequences of these sanctions announced by the U.S. and its allies play out directly in the Russian economy. You can see lines at ATMs as people are trying to withdraw funds. There's a fear that banks in Russia might not be able to finance their operations. And a lot of this comes on the heels of that big announcement that the U.S. and the EU are going to freeze the assets of Russia's central bank. Basically, what that means is that their central bank cannot tap into these reserves that it's stored up in anticipation of potentially being cut off from other countries around the world. It can't use those reserves now, and that means that it's going to be unable to finance operations. If other banks need them, this could lead to more inflation and could cause more pain for the average Russian household.
Well, we also now know that the oil company Shell is pulling out of Russia. So what does this move mean for gas and prices here in the United States?
This is a big move. Another company joining in this effort to say we do not support doing business in Russia. It comes after BP exited its own stake in a Russian-owned gas company as well. And really what this means is that these Russian state-owned oil and gas companies could start to feel the effect on their bottom lines. And that could mean that they might have to make up for that with additional production. Potentially, there could be a good result here if oil production if they need to boost production because of the high prices to make more money, that could end up lowering prices at the pump. A lot of uncertainty, and we are seeing oil prices trade higher today here, Kira.
All right, Elizabeth, Phil, Aaron, guys, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.